Let me set the record straight before this HOA spins their version in the next newsletter. I didn't move to Whispering Pines to cause trouble. I retired here to sit on my porch, drink my coffee, and ring my grandfather's brass bank bell every morning at 8 a.m. not to stir drama, not to challenge authority. Just a simple clang. Once a day. It's been in my family for 3 generations, solid brass. 1907 engraving. Once hung in the First National Bank of Clearwater. To me, it's more than metal. It's memory. But apparently, Judith Karen Mallory, the newly minted president of our HOA, saw it differently. Let me tell you, I've dealt with some tough customers in my day. I spent nearly 4 decades in financial consulting. I've been in boardrooms where billions of dollars hung on the edge of a sentence. But Karen? She was something else. She wasn't about numbers or law. She was about control. And control, when mixed with power and zero oversight, turns into pure HOA-grade madness. It started innocently. Or so I thought. A neatly folded letter arrived, sealed with a gold HOA sticker like they thought they were the Vatican. Dear Mr. Thorne, it has come to our attention that your property features an audio-producing object in violation of Section 4.6.3 of the Community Aesthetic Ordinance. The bell must be removed within 72 hours. Continued non-compliance may result in daily fines of $1,000. Sincerely, Judith K. Mallory, President. Whispering Pines HOA. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. I wasn't new to bureaucracy. I knew a threat when I saw one. But this was weak tea. That ordinance had more holes than a screen door in a hurricane. There was no decibel measurement listed. No reference to city code. Just vague language dressed up in official fonts. So the next morning, I rang the bell. One clear clang. Just as my father did. Just as his father did. That's when the real games began. 2 days later, a young man in cargo shorts showed up snapping photos of my porch. Didn't introduce himself. Just click, click, click like I was a crime scene. My guess? Karen's nephew playing code enforcer. I waved at him. He didn't wave back. Next came the sign. Laminated. Bright red letters. Right on my lawn. Property in violation, subject to fines. Subtle. Judith. Very subtle. I could have ignored it. Could have gone down to her little HOA shack and begged for forgiveness. But see, I've lived long enough to know that bullies don't stop because you comply. They stop when you push back harder. So I did. She invited me to an informal hearing with the board. More like a kangaroo court in a rec center. I wore a 3-piece suit. Brought a leather briefcase, and sat down across from her like it was Wall Street all over again. Judith, I said, looking her straight in the eye, that ordinance you're citing isn't legally enforceable. No measurable sound limits. No proper due process. And unless this HOA's been deputized by the county, you're bluffing. She blinked. Smiled that tight, teeth-clenched smile. The one people wear right before they lose their grip. Mr. Thorne, she said. We're just trying to maintain peace and harmony. Then stop disrupting mine. I replied. The room went dead silent. Now, let me be clear, I wasn't trying to start a revolution. I just wanted to ring my damn bell. But once I saw what she was willing to do over something so small, I knew it wasn't about the bell. It was about control. And I hate being controlled. Always have. She escalated. Issued a formal fine of $7,000. Blocked me from the community pool. Filed a motion to restrict my voting rights in the next HOA election. All over a single chime. But what Judith didn't know was that while she was sending letters and printing signs, I was making calls. Old friends in banking. Former colleagues in regulatory affairs. I wasn't going to fight this with anger. I was going to fight it with data. You see, you don't mess with an old man who has nothing to lose and everything documented. I'd cracked billion-dollar frauds before breakfast. And this little HOA queen had no idea the storm she'd just rung into motion. Because the bell? It wasn't just history. It was the opening shot. You'd think after our little informal hearing, Judith would have backed off. I mean, I wasn't exactly unclear. But Karen types never retreat. No. They double down like a rookie gambler on a losing streak. And they always think the next HOA bylaw will save their pride. The very next day after that meeting, I found a notice taped to my door, $1,000 per day. That's what they were fining me for: continued non-compliance with audio decor regulations. Audio decor. Like my grandfather's bank bell was a Bluetooth speaker blasting dubstep. And get this, along with the fine, they shut off my water. Yes. Water. In 21st century America. In a so-called community of harmony. They cut off my basic utility access. I had to shower using a garden hose for 2 days. The dog wouldn't even drink from the faucet, it hissed like a dry rattlesnake. They also put up a new sign on my front lawn. It was larger this time. Staked right into the sod I paid to reseed myself. Red letters. Bold font. HOA seal at the top. Notice, this property is in violation of Whispering Pines community standards. Resident subject to cumulative fines and legal escalation. Funny thing is, people started slowing down as they walked past. At first, I thought they were judging me. But then I noticed something strange. They weren't looking at me like I was the problem. They were curious. Some were even amused. A few gave me a thumbs up. Because here's the thing HOA Karens never account for: people don't love tyrants. Still, Judith wanted more. She called a special community assembly. Of course. It wasn't that special, just another chance for her to perform. She'd booked the clubhouse, printed flyers, and lured in half the neighborhood with free cookies and lemonade. The topic? Ongoing violations and community integrity. Subtle. I walked in 10 minutes late. On purpose. Wearing the same 3-piece suit from last time. Silence fell like a guillotine when I opened the door. Karen was already halfway through a PowerPoint presentation. Yes. A PowerPoint, titled Restoring Order, Protecting Our Neighborhood from Disruptive Elements. Slide 3? A photo of my porch. Slide 4? The bell. And as you can see, she said, pointing at the screen with a laser pointer like she was briefing NATO. This persistent sound disturbance has not only violated community guidelines but also caused measurable distress to residents. I raised my hand. She paused. Mr. Thorne, she said. We'll get to resident feedback during the open comments section. I ignored her. Judith, I said calmly. Have you read the full terms of your mortgage contract? The entire room froze. Even the laser pointer trembled a little in her hand. Excuse me? She snapped. I'm just wondering, I continued, if you're aware that the line of credit you used to purchase your home, and the one used to fund that little HOA community beautification project, was underwritten by Loma Ridge Capital. And that Loma Ridge happens to have a strict clause about fiduciary compliance when HOA funds are tied to personal mortgages. Silence. I let it linger. I wanted it to sting. Because if you haven't read it, I added, I'd be happy to explain. I helped write it. You could have heard a pin drop in that carpeted clubhouse. I saw it in her face, the flicker of panic. The moment she realized I wasn't just some crotchety old man with a loud bell. I was the one thing she didn't prepare for, an expert with receipts. Now here's the thing, I didn't say it to be cruel. Okay. Maybe a little. But mostly, I said it because I was done playing defense. Karen had made this personal. Cutting off my water? Fining me for family history? Dragging my name through a neighborhood slideshow? That was war. So that night, I pulled out an old leather file box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were contacts, names, people I used to work with at firms, banks, compliance offices, people who owed me favors. I started making calls. I asked questions about Whispering Pines HOA, their filings, their public records, their funding sources. I found out the Community Enhancement Fund was suspiciously vague. I found out Karen had signed off on contracts with a construction company linked to her nephew. I found out she had tied part of her personal mortgage to a communal HOA equity pool that, legally, she wasn't supposed to access. And I didn't say a word. Not yet. Because if there's one thing I learned from decades in finance, it's this: you never tip your hand when the house is bluffing. Instead, you sit back, sip your coffee, and let the bell ring one more time. Because this time, that sound wasn't just tradition. It was the warning shot. Here's the thing about people like Judith Karen Mallory: they love paperwork. As long as no one reads it, they'll throw rules at your face like confetti, cite bylaws like scripture, and drown you in passive-aggressive PDF attachments. But the moment someone flips the script and reads their fine print, they start to sweat. After that community meeting stunt, I knew I had to stop playing defense. I wasn't just up against a petty tyrant, I was up against a petty tyrant with access to communal funds and a god complex. Dangerous combination. So I did what any retired financial forensic advisor would do. I dusted off my Rolodex and made some calls. And let me tell you, my Rolodex is lethal. First call? My old colleague Cynthia, now working compliance for a regional lender tied to community development loans. I asked if she could dig up anything on Whispering Pines HOA. She laughed. "Chris," she said, "if you're calling, someone's in trouble." 3 hours later, she called me back. Her tone had changed. "So, your HOA took out a line of credit last year, $350,000, through a non-profit trust, supposed to be earmarked for community infrastructure upgrades. Very specific. Header ramps, trail lighting, security cameras." "Let me guess," I said. "None of that exists." "Correct. But you do have a new $14,000 Murano glass chandelier hanging in the HOA office." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Turns out Karen had been playing a little game. The HOA had applied for funding through a non-profit that supports accessible community beautification projects. The approval went through because Karen's application cited inclusive infrastructure upgrades and included stock photos of ramps and benches, none of which exist in Whispering Pines. Instead, the money had been used on an interior redesign of the HOA headquarters, which is just a glorified tool shed, hiring her nephew as a licensed contractor for said redesign, several business travel expenses to wellness resorts, including one in Sedona, Arizona. Yes, you heard me right. Wellness resorts. I dug deeper. Turns out her nephew, Bryce Mallory, is not a licensed contractor. He owns a landscaping Instagram page with 9 followers and no tax ID. She'd issued him 3 separate payments totaling $18,200 from the Community Enhancement Fund for outdoor meditation zone development, which I assume is code for laying down a yoga mat on HOA property and calling it transcendental. I started pulling every public filing HOA Whispering Pines had submitted in the last 3 years. It wasn't just sloppiness. It was systematic. Fake invoices. Internal emergency sessions held without quorum. Karen approving her own expenses as both president and treasurer. I even found a reimbursement for a $2,500 strategic planning lunch held at a private golf course. Signed by, you guessed it, Karen. Now, I know what you're thinking, Grizz. Why didn't anyone notice this before? Because no one checks the books when the lights are working and the grass is cut. That's the HOA trap. They count on everyone being too busy, too polite, or too tired to care. But me? I had time. I had patience. And I had a 40-year itch to scratch. Every night that week, I sat on my porch with a pot of black coffee and a manila folder. Every neighbor who walked by, I greeted them with a smile and a question. "Hey Bill, you ever see those ADA ramps Karen promised in last year's newsletter?" "Janet, remember the surveillance cameras they said were going up by the walking trail? Ever seen one?" "Kevin, did you know your HOA dues might have funded a crystal chakra retreat in Sedona?" I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I planted seeds. By Friday, I had enough documentation to choke a county clerk. And all the while, that brass bell sat on my porch. Quiet. I didn't ring it that week. Not once. Because when it rang again, I wanted everyone to hear it. Not just as a sound, but as a statement. Because when you've got receipts, you don't need to yell. You just wait. And then, when the moment's right, you ring the damn bell. You ever watch a pot just before it boils? That's what Whispering Pines felt like the morning I dropped the financial report in every single mailbox on Maple Lane, Birchwood Circle, and Dogwood Drive. 42 pages. Annotated. Highlighted. Indexed. I even added sticky notes for the folks who prefer summaries over spreadsheets. That report was the culmination of 2 weeks of digging, cross-referencing invoices, and calling in every old favor I had left. It wasn't just numbers, it was a narrative. A story of misused funds, falsified invoices, HOA bylaws bent into pretzels, and a woman so drunk on power she thought her nameplate gave her diplomatic immunity. And let me tell you, the neighborhood lit up like a Christmas tree in July. Phones rang. Group chats exploded. Folks who hadn't spoken to each other in months were suddenly comparing notes on how much they'd been paying in dues versus what they were actually getting in return. Turns out the security patrol Karen kept referencing in newsletters was just her cousin Rick driving around in a beat-up Camry with a magnetic HOA volunteer sticker on the door. By noon, I was getting text messages from neighbors I barely knew. Chris, is this for real? She spent what on a spa retreat? Do you think we can sue her? And oh, it gets better. The next morning, the HOA's account at Loma Ridge Bank was frozen. Why? Because one of my old friends on the inside saw the report, passed it up the compliance chain, and they pulled the emergency brake on all outgoing transactions. That means no payments to her nephew, no reimbursement for her strategic lunches, and no more money to fund her little empire. Then came the cherry on top, an inquiry notice from the State Division of Nonprofit Oversight. Turns out Karen's creative accounting didn't just violate HOA policy, it tripped a few state statutes too. Fraud. Misuse of charitable funds. Possible wire fraud. Nothing confirmed yet, but enough to get investigators sniffing around. That's when Karen snapped. She called an emergency HOA security meeting, which is HOA speak for help me save face. I didn't attend, I just waited on my porch. Bell polished, suit pressed, coffee hot. Then she came to me, stormed right up to my porch like she was leading a cavalry charge, holding a manila folder like it was Excalibur. Her face was flushed, her pearls practically rattling. Gregory Thorne, she bellowed. You've committed defamation. You falsified documents. You hacked private HOA communications. I sipped my coffee. Judith, I said, take a deep breath. You're getting blotchy. You're just a bitter old man with a rusty bell and too much time. That's when I reached into my own folder. Calm. Precise. Pulled out a printed email, signed by her. Dated 3 months ago. We'll move HOA funds into the personal project budget temporarily. Just keep the receipts vague for now. She froze. I followed up with a flash drive. Audio file. Her voice, crystal clear. From a recorded HOA Zoom call where she approved her nephew's landscape renovation contract without board consensus. It's just a formality. They won't check. She had no idea her microphone was hot. And just like that, the shouting stopped. She dropped the folder. Her eyes flicked left, then right, searching for an audience. But this time, nobody was on her side. People had gathered quietly. Neighbors with dogs, with coffee cups, with crossed arms and raised eyebrows. And then, almost ceremonially, I stood up, walked to the bell, and gave it a single, resonant ring. Karen flinched. You think this bell means something? She hissed. It's just noise. No, I said, looking her straight in the eye. This bell just rang the end of your empire. That moment? That was better than any courtroom win I ever had. because it wasn't just me standing up to her anymore. It was the whole damn neighborhood. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need a position on the board. I had the truth, the proof, and the bell. And for the first time, Karen had silence. I never planned to become a folk hero. I just wanted to ring my damn bell. But sometimes the universe hands you a hammer and points you at a wall, and by God, it feels good to swing. 2 weeks after the showdown on my porch, the Whispering Pines HOA held an emergency vote. Not a meeting. A vote. You see, once you crack the dam and the truth comes flooding out, even the most passive neighbor suddenly wants to grab a sandbag. We needed a 2/3 majority to remove Karen as president. We got 91%. She didn't even show up to the vote. Probably knew better. When the tally was announced, someone brought champagne. I didn't ask who. I just poured a glass, raised it high, and said, "To community oversight." 3 days later, the State Division of Nonprofit Oversight rolled in. Real investigators. Clipboards. Suits. One of them asked me if I'd testify. I said, "You bring the subpoena. I'll bring the receipts." They smiled. I think they already knew what I had. The HOA's bank accounts? Frozen permanently. The HOA office, that glorified shed with the chandelier and incense diffuser? Padlocked. And Karen? She lost her house. Turns out that cute little equity shuffle she tried, borrowing against HOA funds and tying it to her personal mortgage? Yeah. When the board dissolved, the collateral did too. The bank called in her debt like a shark smelling blood in the water. She was underwater and upside down within a week. Foreclosure notice posted by Friday. And here's the kicker, she tried to move back in. Claimed squatters' rights. Said the HOA bylaws superseded county eviction codes. The sheriff who came to escort her out literally laughed. Said he hadn't heard that one since college. When her U-Haul finally pulled away, the neighborhood cheered. I'm not being metaphorical. We had a block party. Somebody grilled hot dogs. Someone else brought a karaoke machine. I swear. One of the toddlers wore a shirt that said "By Felicia." But here's the part I didn't expect. The next week, the interim board came to my porch. 3 of them. Middle-aged. Nervous smiles. Clipboards shaking a little in their hands. They asked if I'd consider helping restructure the HOA, not as president, but as a community integrity advisor. Basically, someone to keep the next Karen in check. I thought about it. Took a sip of my coffee. Then I looked over at the bell. And I said, "Sure. But the bell stays." They all nodded. The bell wasn't just a bell anymore. It had become a symbol, not just of defiance, but of what happens when you pay attention. When you stand up. And when you don't let bad rules go unchecked. That next weekend, we held a new beginnings meeting. We rewrote the bylaws. Made the finances public. Created a community website with every meeting posted. Transparent. Fair. Simple. The HOA wasn't perfect. It never will be. But at least now, it was honest. And that's all I ever wanted. Now every evening, right before sunset, I walk out with my mug of coffee, stand on the porch, and ring that bell. Once. Clean. Loud. Proud. At first, the dogs barked. Then, they got used to it. Now, every time it rings, the neighborhood seems to pause, just for a second. Like we're all breathing together. Like we remember. Last night, as I rang it, a little girl on a pink scooter skidded to a stop and shouted, "Mommy, the bellman's doing it again." Her mom smiled and waved. A couple down the street clapped once. Jokingly, someone yelled, "You're late, Chris." Even the dogs howled along like a chorus line. And for the first time in a long while, the sound didn't bother anybody. Because when you've lived through HOA tyranny and come out the other side, a little ringing bell isn't a disturbance. It's freedom.